Shruti Smriti Purananam Alayam Karunalayam Namami Bhagavat Padam Shankaram Lokashankaram. So in the last class, before the Navaratri celebration, we had this few weeks, we had this gap because of the Navaratri celebration. We couldn't have the class. So now, before the Navaratri celebration, we actually concluded the first half of the Vivekachudamani, where we find that through discrimination, the teacher is helping the student to get rid of the false identification with the 5 layers of our existence: the Annamaya Kosha, the Pranamaya Kosha, the Manomaya Kosha, the Vijnanamaya Kosha, and the Anandamaya Kosha. So what was the basic theme, the basic tune of this process of discrimination? That the self is something which is Trikal Avadhita Satya. That in Vedanta, the truth has been defined as something which is Trikal Avadhita. What it means? The one whose existence is not interrupted by the 3 phases of time: past, present, and future. That something was, is, will be, through eternity, is Sat. So the ultimate reality is something which is Sat. That's one aspect. The other aspect is that it is eternal, and at the same time it is beyond all vikara, transformation. That generally in this world of phenomenal existence, we find everything goes through the process of 6 transformations. What are they? Jayate, Asti, Viparinamate, Jayate, Asti, Vardhate, Viparinamate, Apakshiyate, Nasti. So what are they? That everything is born and then it exists for some time, Asti, and as long as it exists, first we find in the initial stage there is a growth, Vardhate, and then Viparinamate, then the transformation process starts, and then Apakshiyate, the process of degeneration starts, and then Nasti. At last, it gets annihilated. So there is Shada Vikara we find in all the phenomenal existence. Whatever has this Nama, Rupa, whatever has a name and a form, goes through this process of 6 transformations. The ultimate self is considered as something which is beyond this transformation. It is always as if in the eternal present. So that's why we use the word Purana. The Purana means Pura Api Navaiva, ever aging, never old. So these are the 2 aspects of the ultimate reality. That it is eternal, it was, it is, it will be, and it is eternal. At the same time, it is not undergoing any transformation. It is as if in the eternal present. So keeping these 2 aspects of the ultimate reality in mind, when we were trying to find out that our false identification with the body, we find the body is, of course, going through the process of change. It is never eternal. It, at the same time, is constantly in a process of flow. The same is with the Pranamaya Kosha, that our identification with the vital forces of our existence, we find that that identification is also wrong, because the ultimate reality which is Sat Swarupa, the ultimate reality which is behind the Shara Vikara, this, if I just try to find out the nature of the Pranamaya Kosha, it negates both this idea there. The same with the Manomaya Kosha, the same with the Vijnanamaya Kosha, and same with the Anandamaya Kosha. So this we studied in details. And through this process of discrimination, what we did, we negated our false identification with these 6 layers of erroneous identification, which we consider as self. Now the second portion of Vivekachudamani starts with the 212th verse, where we find the disciple is asking a very pertinent question. Then if all the false identifications are wrong, is there something called self? Because nothing can be comprehended behind this, beyond these 6 levels of false identification. Yes, they are false identification that I have understood, but beyond that, I can never even in any way comprehend about my existence. So is there something which is the ultimate reality, which exists, or as in the Buddhist way of thought we find, they say, everything is a flow. Behind the flow, there is nothing called the self. The concept of anatma. So that there is no self. That all this flow somehow gives us the idea of something permanent behind the flow. But actually there is no self. In Buddhism, it is denied. Very interestingly, Buddha never denied the existence of self. But in later Buddhism, we find that the self has been denied. Then has Buddha accepted the self? No. See, he was actually silent. He never spoke about the existence of self, neither he spoke about the non-existence of self. Many may say, no, it's not true. The very second discourse of Buddha after his enlightenment, the famous discourse is called the Discourse on the Non-Self, Anatma. The first discourse was on the 4 Arya Satya, the 4 this noble truths, and the second was on Anatma. But very interestingly, we will find what Buddha said, something which we never properly comprehend. What he said, that Buddha also, almost like that Pancha Kosha, Buddha is speaking of 5 layers of our false identification. The body, the mental formations, the thought process, the feelings, and the stream of consciousness, and the buddhi, the conceptualizations. These are the 5 flows which he is speaking, and he is saying there is no self in them. So there is no self actually is a phrase, not a sentence for Buddha. That there is no self in the body, there is no self in the mental formations, there is no self in the feelings, there is no self in the conceptualizations, there is no self in the stream of consciousness. So what happened in the later Buddhism, that the phrase was taken as a sentence, that there is no self. That what Buddha is saying, there is no self in something. So if you take that portion of the phrase, then you will find Buddha is actually never speaking of there is no self. But throughout his life, we find at the same time he has never asserted of the existence of self. He was silent about it. What was the reason? That something which is beyond our comprehension, which is beyond our perception, if we try to describe it, we can never understand it. We can understand the things which is within our comprehension. That example which we give again and again. Just take into consideration a person who has tasted the mango. He comes and describes the taste of mango to a group of people who have not tasted the mango. Now he says mango is sweet and it has a nice flavor. He tries to describe the taste of mango to the best of his ability. Will it in any way help those people who have not tasted the mango to understand the taste of mango? Impossible. They may develop some concepts, but it in no way will tally with the real taste of mango. It's impossible. So knowledge is realization. So Buddha understood when he was born, he found that there was so much quarrel in the name of religion among the various denominations about the nature of truth. Buddha found it is all useless, waste of time. The thing which is beyond your comprehension, beyond your perception. However you may try to go on, analyze on it, you can never come to any such conclusion. So what he gave importance to? He gave importance to the path, the eightfold path. In the Arya, these four noble truths, the last truth was there's a way out. And that way out is that eightfold path. So I am showing you the way. You follow it, it will take you to the realization. And then you get your answer. What's the use of just simply discussing on it? It won't help. So that's why Buddha was silent. But as it has happened previously, that when a man of realization comes and tries to speak out the truth, there is a misapprehension. And Buddha also failed that way. He tried to be silent. He wanted to be silent about the absolute truth. But there we find there's a misapprehensions, there's a misinterpretation of his silence. So at last we find that this idea of anatma is developing. And that's the reflection which we will find in the 212th verse, with which the second part of the Vivekachudamani starts. The first part was through discrimination to negate the 5 layers of false identification. And the second part now is the ascertaining of the real nature of the self. That after I negate that, now the self, what its real nature is, let's try to understand through Sravana, Manana, Nididhyasana. So first I have to hear it from the scriptures, I have to cogitate upon it, and to have some intellectual conviction. And then Nididhyasana speaks of meditating on the intellectual conviction, which can take you to the realization. Without realization, knowledge is not possible. But for realization, again, I need a type of motivation factor. There's always a motivation. So for that motivation, I need a sort of intellectual conviction. So Manana helps us to give that intellectual conviction, which once I have, that will give me the motivation factor for Nididhyasana, for the practice, and that practice ultimately can take us to the realization. So the 212th verse, we find the Shishya, just like any other person, when you negate, as Sri Ramakrishna says, is there no self? And he gives a very common example. He gives the example of an onion. If you go on peeling off the onion, layers after layers, at last nothing remains. So is it something like that there is no self? All this false identification is like the layers of our existence, for misapprehension of our existence, which we one by one peel off and find nothing as the core? Or is there something which is the core of this essence of this entire existence? Which is the essence of me, which is the essence of you, which is the essence of entire existence. So that's the doubt with which this second portion starts. So is the self a void? That is, there's nothing called self. So the Shishya, this is the question he will be asking to the teacher. Shishya uvacha mitthyatvena nishiddheshu kosheshu eteshu panchashu sarva abhavam vina kinchit na pashyami atra he guroho vigeyam kimu vastu asti swatmana atma vipaschita. So it's a very wise question that disciple is asking to the teacher. What he's saying? O Guru, this Guru, he's addressing his Guru. O Guru, hey Guru, that mithatvena nishiddhesu kosheshu eteshu panchashu. That when these 5 sheaths are negated as being unreal, mithatvena, this unreal, mitha means unreal, nishiddheshu, that I have negated them. Nishiddha means to negate. Negated these 5 kosha as unreal. Mithatvena nishiddheshu kosheshu. Is all these 5 koshas. Kosheshu, eteshu, panchashu. I have negated them. Now, I do not see anything except this absolute void. Sarvang abhavang vina kinchit na pashyami. Now there is just an eternal void. Once I negate this, that's what I see. I do not see anything except absolute void. Sarvam abhavang vina. That's everything is abhava. Without that, nothing. Pashyami. Na pashyami atra. Kinchit na pashyami. I see nothing apart from void. So then the question comes, what then there is to be known by the wise man? As he is Atman. Vigeyam kimu vastu. That what's that? What's that substance which is to be known as Atma? Swatman, as myself. This Atma Vipaschita. This is by a wise man. A Vipaschita means a wise man. A man of realization. What is going to realize as his self? So that's the question which the disciple is asking to the teacher. So we find that it's a very, very wise question. And apparently it seems the reason behind this question is flawless. That it's really that through my common sense, now you say that I have realized, but my common sense in no way understands what realization is. With my present common sense, I find that once you negate, yes, that negation also, with the help of my analysis, I find what you say is true, that all these 5 layers of existence is a flow, they are not eternal, hence it cannot be something which can be considered as the self which is eternal. So there is nothing eternal, it is a flow which is giving an appearance of as if a self behind it. So this we find even in Chandogya Upanishad. It's a wonderful way of relating to this fact, that when the disciple asks the teacher, in the Chandogya Upanishad, there is a wonderful dialogue between Aruni and Shvetaketu. So the Aruni is the teacher and Shvetaketu is the student. So the teacher and the student, the Shvetaketu is inquiring about the self to his teacher Aruni. That what is that self? By negating everything, at last you are speaking of the self. What is that self? Now the teacher, what he does? He asks the student, Shvetaketu, to get the fruit of a banyan tree. So he gets the fruit of a banyan tree. And now the teacher asks, break it, cut it. What do you see inside? Innumerable seeds inside the fruit. Yes. Now take one of the seed, break it. What do you see? Nothing. The teacher says that nothing is everything. The thing which you are seeing inside the seed, the essence from which the huge banyan tree has come. The essence is there. What you are saying as nothing is actually everything. So for this, you have to have Shraddha, the faith. Shraddhasya Somya. Through the process of Sravana, Manana, Nididhyasana, at last, you have to get established in the truth. This idea even we find in the lectures of Swami Vivekananda. He says in modern science you speak of evolution. But at the same time you speak of conservation of energy. That nothing can be created. It's just a modification. If anything has evolved, how can it be that even with your scientific knowledge you can say it has evolved from zero? Something must be there from which it has evolved. And again it gets involved into it. This evolution presupposes involution. That's the words of Swami Vivekananda. So now, before proceeding, let us try to understand another way of understanding that idea of self. Very wonderfully Swami Vivekananda puts it. That he says in Buddhism they speak of the fire band. What's the fire band? That when you are moving a torch very fast, in a circular motion you are moving and very fast, that's called the alata. Alata is the fire band. What I see a fire band. When I'm moving the torch very fast, I see a ring of fire, a band of fire. Is really the band of fire there? No, it's not there. So this is the simile which is used in Buddhism for explaining the concept of erroneous self. That everything is a flow. Behind the flow, just like the fire band, something appears to be permanent, which is actually not there. Swami Vivekananda is giving a very nice way of an explanation to negate this idea. It seems to be very, very strong argument. That behind the flow, the self like the fire band appears to be something there, but actually it is not there. It is an illusion. Swamiji says, yes, it's correct. That's what Vedanta also says, that idea of the self, ahankara, the present idea of the self, which is my ego, that is illusion. That is the fire band. Then, is there something called self? Swamiji is giving a very interesting word in his line. In his complete works, we find this line that in this way of argument that there is no self, we take just the object, we forget about the subject. What is saying? Yes, the fire band is not there, it is an illusion. But someone is hallucinating, someone is deluding. Someone is being deluded by thinking the fire band as something which is there. So someone who is deluded, the one who is deluded, he is the witness. Without the witness, there is no fire band. There is someone who is seeing the fire band. So if you take the subject into account, then again the question of self comes into existence. So yes, even in Vedanta the same thing they say. The ahankara, the ego, is something which is an illusion. But the one who is witnessing it, that is the self. So in a very common way they say, the one who is saying there is no self is the self. The one who is saying there is no self. That someone is saying, someone who is denying the self is the self. So that's the idea which the teacher will now try to enunciate to the student. So that's in the 213th and in the 214th verse, the teacher will first appreciate the student for his subtle understanding. That he has already understood that these false layers of our identification with these 5 layers of existence, that he has understood. So he of course has to be appreciated for his subtle intellectual analysis. But at the same time, that the power of this analysis has to take him to something which is affirmative. So that the teacher will now help the student. So what is saying? Sri Guru Uvacha, the 13th and the 14th verse. Satyam uktam tvaya vidvan nipuna asi vicharane aham adi vikara te tat abhava ayam api anu. That's the 213th verse. And there was the 214th verse. Sarve yena anubhuyante yah swayang na anubhuyate tam atmanam veditaram vidhi buddhya sushukshmaya. So satyam uktam tvaya vidvan asi vicharane. So the Guru, what he's saying, he's first appreciating the disciple's power of analysis. That, O learned one, that Vidwan, the learned one, you have spoken truly. What you have, that I am not denying. What you say is really something which has to be appreciated. What you have spoken is true, is something which is true. Satyamuktam tvaya vidvan. What you have spoken is truth. But you are clever in inquiry. Nipuna asi vicharane. You are very clever. But now he is saying that where you have missed the point, he by whom the modifications of the ahankara and also their negations are perceived. Aham adi vikara. That always I have that feeling, I am. It's constantly. I can never get rid of it. It is something which is called swasang vedya. It is my own feeling. That I can deny, I can doubt the existence of everyone else. What's the proof? Now the artificial intelligence is so have started imitating the humans in such a perfect way. A time will come when in a group, if in a meeting among the people, among the persons, if some artificial intelligence is sitting, it is almost impossible to differentiate which one is artificial intelligence and which is a real human being. It can be. So there is a chance when I can doubt the so-called the self in all. I do not know what actually speaks of the idea of the consciousness, that in the artificial intelligence it can imitate the human being. What can it can imitate? It can imitate only the stimuli response conditioning. But what it cannot imitate, there is someone behind the stimuli response conditioning who is witnessing the stimuli response conditioning. Stimuli response. When I see, I know I am seeing. After seeing, I act. I see a flower. I am a devotee. I go, I pluck the flower and offer it to the altar. So this is my action. This is a response. I know I am responding. An artificial intelligence can imitate the stimuli response. But is there someone who is witnessing that within that subjective feeling that I am seeing, I am doing? That's the big question. So I can doubt the so-called consciousnesses in everyone. I do not know. But can I doubt the consciousness within me? Impossible. Because I am constantly aware of that awareness behind me, which is constantly saying I, which is witnessing all my perceptions, which is witnessing all my actions, which is witnessing all my feelings. I cannot deny that. So that's the thing. Now we are saying that that's the thing through analysis. You have came to the conclusion that also is not the self. So he by whom the modifications of the ahankara, the ego, etc., and also their negations. So first, just by default, I take the ahankara to be true, the sense of I as true, and through the analysis, even in modern science, through the scripture analysis, even in the modern science, at last I proves to be false. So first, I thought it to be true, and then I thought to be false. So now behind this, who is there who is thinking it to be true and who is thinking it to be false? There is a Sakshi. There is someone who is seeing it. So that's the thing. So aham adi vikara te tat abhava ayam api anu. That I first took them to be truth, and again I at last negated them and found it is actually not there. So the Sakshi, the one who is witnessing, so by which everything is perceived, who is not himself perceived. Sarve yena anubhuyante yas swayam na anubhuyate. Now you say, yes, you are saying that there is a Sakshi, but can you show me the Sakshi? That's the big question now. Now again the scripture resorts to a wonderful analysis, that the subject can never be known. Very interesting. When Swami Vivekachudamani was in the West, he was the guest of some American devotee, and in that house there was a small child, a young boy, small boy. One day he just entered Swami Vivekananda's room. As a small boy, you know that they have no such inhibitions. He simply entered. And he saw Swami Vivekananda sitting motionless. So he had no idea of meditation, that actually Swamiji was meditating. So he simply came, and he was a child, a small child. He came seeing Swamiji motionless. At last he crept into his lap. He came and sat on his lap. Naturally Swamiji's meditation broke. Suddenly a child comes and sits on his lap. Swamiji opens his eyes, and the small child, the first question he asked, whether God is? The Swamiji's reply is, yes, God is. And the child's next question, then why cannot I see him? If he is, I have to see him. And then Swamiji's reply was very interesting. Can you see your own eyes? That was his reply. Can you see your own eyes? The child remembered the answer only when he grew up. Then only he realized the significance of that answer, and that he is mentioning in his reminiscences. Actually, that's the basic idea with which the Drik Drishya Viveka starts. That the subject is not known. With the eyes, I see everything. Anything which is moving, I see. All these varieties of things I see with these eyes. But can I see the eye with my own eye? Impossible. Then how I am aware of my eyes? With my mind. What I see with my eyes, that has to be, again, what you say, this perceived by the mind. The mind which is behind the eyes. So now the mind becomes the subject, the eyes become the object. Because of the mind, I am aware of the eyes. And again, I can see my thoughts. I can see my feelings. So there must be someone behind the mind. And then who is he? And there the scriptures is saying, if I can know who is he, then someone must be observing that. It will lead to infinite regression. That is a flaw in logic. That if I continue that way, then I have to think there is a Sakshi behind that. Again, behind this Sakshi, there is a Sakshi. So I have to at last conclude that there is a Sakshi, ultimate Sakshi, which cannot be known. Because if it is known, then there must be someone behind him. So the ultimate Sakshi cannot be known. The one who is observing, the ultimate one. Because of him, everything can be perceived, but he cannot be perceived. That is the idea. Sarvang yena anubhuyante. Because of the self, everything is perceived. Yah swayang na anubhuyate. But it itself can never be perceived. So this is the wonderful idea. The ultimate self is something which is the ultimate subject, which cannot be known. It can be easily understood even in the present day. There are so many things which I can only know by its effect. That we say that there is light. Have anyone seen light? No one has seen light. I become aware of light only when it falls on an object. You will say, no, the room is lighted, I feel it. We have a big mistake. The room is having this atmosphere, the air is there. The light is falling on the air and the light is getting dispersed because it is falling on the air. If you go to the moon, you will see a wonderful thing. Even in the broad day time, in the day when the sun is on the sky, what you will see? You can see the sun, of course, in the sky, but the entire sky is dark. And again, you can see the light only on the surface of the moon. But even in the daytime, the so-called the sky is dark because there is no atmosphere. So this is the thing we never realize here on earth because of the atmosphere. We think as if I'm seeing the light. We never see light. Light is never visible. Light is something which becomes visible when it falls on an object and the object shines. So I become aware of the light when it falls on an object. Can I ever see gravitation? No. I become aware, again the same way, I become aware of gravitation when it is acting upon an object. Something is falling, that pull, the drag. When it is acting on an object, then only I become aware of the gravitation. Magnetism, the same thing. When I see the iron filings forming a definite pattern around an iron bar, then I become aware of magnetism. So even in this physical world, we find there are certain phenomena which can be understood only by its effect on some object. Otherwise, it is not known. So by the effect, I know its existence. This in Vedanta is called Tatastha Lakshana. These terms, actually what has happened, it is such a scientific process of analysis has done. But as we are not aware of those terms are now obsolete. We don't use those words. That's why we don't realize its meaning. But how wonderful they have analyzed. They called tatastha. Tata means the shore, the bank. Suppose you are staying in a place in your house where the river is very near your house, but it's not visible. Some guests come and you say, the river is very near to my house. And he says, where? I cannot see it. And then you point to a tall tree and say, you see the tree? Yeah. That tree is just by the bank of the river, just on the on the shore of the river, on the side of the river. The river is not visible, but by pointing, that tree becomes a reference point. By pointing to the tree, which is in the tata, which is in the bank of the river, tata is the bank, I somehow can explain him about the existence of the river. The river is not visible. So all this, the entire world is as if the shore of the existence. It becomes something which is perceived because someone is witnessing it. The one who is witnessing, who is he? I can never see. If I can see it, then he becomes an object. So that's the wonderful way of analysis. That it is not anubhuyate. It cannot be experienced. But because of it, everything can be experienced. And that's tam atmanam veditaram. Know that to be the self. Vidhi buddhya susukshmaya. You have already used your sukshma buddhi. But don't stop there and get deviated from that ultimate analysis of the affirmation of the self. And that's why in spiritual journey, that's why I think that there is a chance of getting stuck in the milestone, taking the milestone to be the ultimate goal. So that's why the scriptures are there to show us the way, that don't take this milestone to be the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is still ahead. So for that, you need that susukshmaya, that very, very subtle intellect. With shraddha, with faith, you have to pursue your analysis so that it can take you to that affirmation, the idea of the self. So that's what the teacher is doing. So the doubter of the self is the self, as we were saying. Sarve yena anubhuyanti yah swayam anubhuyate. As it being the ultimate subject, it can never be known. So the same is further explained for better understanding again in the next verse. What it is saying, tat sakshikang, the 215th verse. Tat sakshikang bhavet tat tat yat yat yena anubhuyate kasya api an anubhutarthe sakshitvam na upashujyate. So what is this? That one becomes the witness of that which one sees. When you are seeing something, you are the witness. But this tat sakshikang bhavet, that you become the sakshi, yat yena anubhut, whatever you can see, you are the sakshi. Kasya api an anubhutarthe, if you cannot see anything, then the question of sakshi is also not there. So what's the thing? That when you are trying to see the self by the self, so it's because everything else has been negated. There is no question of seeing the self, because the self alone exists, the self alone abides. That there is no question of seeing the self by the self, because what, as the same argument which we were saying previously, because if I can see the self, it will immediately presuppose that there is someone apart from the self who is observing the self, and that will lead to infinite regression. So, but the self being the ultimate witness is not witnessed by anyone. So the question of witnessing the self is irrelevant. I cannot see it. It's just like the light, just as we were saying in the just now in the discussion, that just like the light is not visible unless it shines on an object, just as gravitation can never be experienced unless it is acting on an object, similarly the self cannot be as such known unless it shines through this entire phenomenal existence. So that next verse, what it is saying, asau swa sakshika bhava yata swena anubhuyate atah parang swayam sakshat pratyagatma nacha itara. So the Atman is the self-cognized entity, because it is cognized by itself. So as there is nothing apart from the self cognizes itself. That is called swa anubhuti. Asau swa sakshika bhava svena anubhuyate. Hence the individual soul is itself and directly the Supreme Brahman and nothing else. So here sometimes we find as if Shankaracharya is very hastily going to the conclusion that as this nothing can see the Sakshi, that Sakshi is the ultimate self. What actually it means? That this self is the ultimate reality, non-dual reality behind entire existence. So to understand that, again let us resort to that understanding of light and gravitation. See, light is something which is non-local. It is everywhere. Only when it is falling on an object, it becomes localized. I see that object is shining. But actually light is everywhere. When an object is there in its presence, the object gets illumined and I become aware of light. The thing which was non-local becomes local when an object comes into existence. Gravitation is everywhere. The moment an object is there and I see the object falling, I become aware of gravitation. The non-local gravitation becomes localized through that object, isn't it? Similarly, as long as the self is in association with the body-mind complex, the self itself is non-local. It is a non-dual reality. But when it comes in association with the body-mind complex, it gets localized here, creating the sense of ahankara and all other vikaras which results from ahankara. All the modifications results from ahankara. First the ahankara comes, that ego, that I am this limited body-mind complex, and from that all other modifications develop. The ego is the nodal point. So the moment that ahankara is dilated, then what happens? The self is no more localized. It gets established in its non-local, non-dual identity. Just like the gravitation, which is everywhere. But only when it is acting on an object, I think that it is localized in that object. But is it just in that object? No, it is everywhere. The light is everywhere. When it is falling on an object, it gets localized to that object, but it is everywhere. Similarly, the self, when you have negated everything through which the self is acting, like in association with the body-mind complex, the self becomes perceptible. You negate that. Then what remains is the non-local consciousness alone. So that's the idea of the self becoming the Atman is Brahman. The same Atman is Brahman. It's just that, to give a very common example, the sun in the sky, when it is reflected in the waves of the ocean, the one sun appears as many. Each and every wave will have a reflection of the sun. One sun appears as innumerable. Each wave with the reflection of the sun appears as many. The sun, which is in no way distorted, it is as it is. Because of the shape of the wave, because of the motion of the water in the wave, it may be appeared to be moving, it may be appeared to be oblong, elongated. All these distortions, motions, everything is in the reflection, not in the real sun. So similarly, the self, when it is getting associated with the body-mind complex, all the motions of all the movements of the body-mind complex, all the flow of the body-mind complex makes me feel that the consciousness is also a flow. But actually, it is just the reflection. The self is something which is beyond all transformation, which is eternal, which is one, which is appearing as many because of its reflection in innumerable waves, and it now appears as innumerable reflection. So that's the idea of the non-duality. The moment you negate, you no more identify yourself with the reflection, you immediately become one with the sun. So that's the thing which this verse is indicating. There's a nice way that this self seeing seeing itself. The moment when the self sees itself, these are the limitations of the world. The self cannot see itself, but just by the limitation of the words, what we are saying, the self, when it is seeing itself, immediately it finds that it is that non-local, non-dual, absolute reality. This Advaita, that non-dual reality, it immediately realizes itself. Sri Ramakrishna, in his simple words, has a nice way of saying it. That in the night, a security guard was just moving around, focusing the torch on all other objects or all other persons. Some other persons were coming. The security guard in the dark was focusing the torch on that other person. The other person became illumined. But the person who got illumined, he couldn't see the night guard. The night guard is not visible because he has focused the torch on that person. So now to see the night guard, the person has to request the night guard, "Oh night guard, please turn the torch and focus it on you so that I can see you." So this is the idea of this swa, this shakshat, pratyagatma. Pratyak, this in Sanskrit, these two words are important. Parak and pratyak. Parak means moving outwards. Pratyak means moving within. So when the self is getting associated with the body-mind complex and it is interacting with the world, it is as if moving out. How to realize the self? Turn the direction. Pratyak, turn it. Then you can see the Atma within, Pratyak Atma. And once you see that, immediately you will find that it is not the localized consciousness within you. It is the absolute reality behind the entire existence. So that's this Pratyak Atma becomes the Supreme Brahman, which has been spoken of in this 216th verse. So this section where the discussion on the reality of the self has been initiated, this section ends with the 217th verse, where in conclusion what it is saying, that this self is something which is beyond all our states of existence, Jagrat, Swapna, Shushupti. It is behind all our feelings that are constantly emanating from us as I, that I can never get rid of that. Something within me is constantly aware of my existence. I am. So that is emanating from there, the self. So all the modifications of our buddhi, behind that is the self, and it is something which is in eternal bliss, Nityananda. It is the Sat Chit Ananda Swarupa. So this is the verse which actually explains in conclusion to this section about the affirmation of the existence of the self, which again we will take up in the next class. This 217th verse, from which we will start in the next class. So with this, we stop our discussion today. Thank you all. Namaskar.